My brother's life fell apart the day he screamed that he doesn't need me for anything. Jesse thought he was the smart one of his friend group, but that's only because the rest of them didn't have an older sister. In reality, I'd saved him from so many disasters over the years, like the time he almost got that swastika neck tattoo, or when he wanted to race his friend's motorcycle without a license. One night after I suggested he shouldn't trust his sketchy friend Kyle with his apartment key, he exploded. "Stop giving me your advice about everything," he yelled over the phone. "I'm a grown man and I don't need you mothering me. From now on, keep all your opinions to yourself because I don't want to hear them." I looked at my phone calmly and said, "Okay, no more advice." Jesse laughed like he'd won something, not realizing he'd just destroyed his own safety net. The next morning, he FaceTimed me to show off his new haircut, and I just shrugged without mentioning the barber had completely butchered the back where he couldn't see. He went out with his friends looking like someone attacked him with hedge clippers, and everyone posted photos on Instagram calling him Lloyd Christmas from Dumb and Dumber. Those same friends saw the photos and started roasting him, which made Jesse desperate to prove he was still cool. That's when Kyle asked to borrow Jesse's car for a quick errand, and Jesse tossed him the keys immediately to show he wasn't uptight. I didn't mention Kyle had lost his license for street racing or that he'd already crashed 2 cars this year. Kyle totaled Jesse's car doing donuts in a parking lot, and since Jesse had let him drive, insurance wouldn't cover anything. Being carless and humiliated made Jesse vulnerable when his ex-girlfriend started texting about how much she missed talking to him. He called me excitedly about reconnecting with her, probably needing the ego boost after the haircut disaster and losing his car. I watched him make plans to meet her for coffee, knowing exactly what was about to happen. 2 days after meeting him, she showed up at his workplace. There, she caused such a scene that security had to escort her out while she screamed about their love. Jesse got written up for personal drama affecting the business. The write-up at work meant Jesse needed extra money, which is exactly when our cousin approached him with a business opportunity, selling supplements from his garage. Jesse texted me that he was investing his rent money for the starter package, desperate to make quick cash. I didn't mention it was an obvious MLM scam, or that our cousin had already burned through 6 different pyramid schemes. Jesse ended up with a garage full of expired protein powder that attracted rats, and he got evicted for non-payment and health code violations. The eviction forced him to move in with our parents, where Jesse felt emasculated and decided to prove his independence by throwing a massive birthday party at their house while they were gone. He posted about it on Facebook, inviting everyone including our sketchy cousins who'd stolen from the family before. I didn't mention our parents' security cameras or that the neighbors were cops. The party ended with 2 arrests, 3 holes in the walls, and our parents kicking him out at 3 a.m. Homeless and desperate, Jesse thought he could stay with our mom if he watched her ancient, aggressive chihuahua for a weekend. I didn't remind him about his severe dog allergies or mention the dog had bitten 3 people last month. He spent the weekend in the emergency room with his eyes swollen shut while the dog destroyed Mom's house, and she blamed him so viciously that even I had to pretend to take her side just to keep the peace. The stress from everything made Jesse's hair start falling out, which his barber said he could fix with a special dye treatment. Jesse went for it without asking anyone about his sensitive scalp, desperate to look normal again. I stayed silent about his history of allergic reactions when he texted me about the treatment. His entire head broke out in chemical burns so severe he had to shave everything off including his eyebrows, and when he tried to cover it with a hat, the fabric stuck to the open wounds. While dealing with the chemical burns, Jesse decided to get a tattoo to prove he could still make good decisions, picking a Chinese symbol he thought meant warrior. I stayed silent even though I knew it actually said toilet, and watched him proudly show it off on social media. A Chinese exchange student at Starbucks literally laughed in his face and took a photo that went viral as dumbest tattoo ever, with 200,000 views. By the time Jesse had lost his job, his car, his hair, his home, and our entire family had blocked him, he was begging me to help him fix everything. "Please just tell me what to do," he said over the phone, his voice cracking while I could hear him scratching his still burning scalp. "You said you didn't want my advice," I reminded him while scrolling through apartment listings for myself, planning to move even further away from this disaster. "Where are you going to be this weekend?" he asked desperately. "I need somewhere to crash." I smiled to myself. That would be giving you information you might use to make a decision, which sounds dangerously close to advice. But I was completely unprepared for what he did next. Jesse showed up at my apartment building at 4 in the morning, pressing every buzzer and screaming my name so loud the whole street could hear him. I woke up to the sound of my intercom buzzing over and over while Jesse's voice crackled through the speaker begging me to let him in. His burned scalp looked red and angry under the streetlight when I looked out my window to see what was happening. The old lady from 3B was already on her phone, probably calling the building manager about the noise. Jesse kept hitting buttons and yelling that he knew I was home and just needed 5 minutes to talk. My phone started ringing and Xander Yates's name popped up on the screen before I even had time to put on pants. He told me my guest was disturbing the whole building and I was responsible for any complaints or damages since visitors fall under tenant liability. I told him I didn't know this person while watching Jesse continue to slam his palm against the buzzer panel. Xander said he was documenting everything for my lease file, and hung up without waiting for me to explain. I grabbed my phone and started disabling every location sharing app I could remember setting up with Jesse over the years. The Find My Friends app from when I used to pick him up from parties was still active and showing my exact address. I blocked him on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and even Venmo, while the buzzing continued for another hour. Someone from the 5th floor yelled out their window that they were calling the cops if he didn't shut up. Jesse finally stopped buzzing but didn't leave, and 20 minutes later, I heard the main door open. Some delivery guy must have let him in thinking he lived here because Jesse's footsteps echoed in the stairwell. I heard him slump down right outside my door and start snoring within minutes. The next morning, I had to step over his body to get to work, and his eyes snapped open the second my foot hit the hallway. He scrambled up and started following me, begging me to just listen for 5 minutes about how bad things were. His shaved eyebrows made his face look weird and surprised even though he was crying. I kept walking toward the subway while he stumbled behind me, his chemical burns visible and crusty in the daylight. People on the platform stared at his messed up head and the neck tattoo peeking out from his collar. He followed me all the way to the train doors, still talking about needing help and family sticking together. I pushed through the crowd and got on while he stayed on the platform since he didn't have money for a fare. During lunch, I went to a legal aid office downtown where the receptionist gave me forms to fill out about harassment. Giles Carpenter came out after 20 minutes and brought me to his small office filled with law books. He explained that I had enough for a temporary restraining order based on the repeated unwanted contact and building disturbance. He gave me a notebook to document every incident with dates and times, saying judges like detailed records. I started writing down everything from that morning while he photocopied my lease agreement showing the visitor policy. He said Jesse showing up again would strengthen the case and to call police immediately if it happened. That evening, my phone rang with Mom's number, and I knew this wouldn't be good. She started screaming the second I answered, saying I was heartless for abandoning Jesse when he needed family most. She called me cruel and jealous, saying I'd always resented him for being the baby of the family. I tried to explain, but she just cried about what the neighbors were thinking after seeing Jesse sleeping outside. I hung up when she started calling me evil, and saying Dad was disappointed in me too. My phone immediately lit up with Facebook notifications, and I saw Jesse had posted about his sister refusing to help during a medical emergency. The post had photos of his chemical burns, and a long story about family betrayal and being homeless. Half my cousins commented calling me selfish, while the other half said Jesse brought everything on himself. My aunt shared the post but also commented the link to the viral tattoo photo asking if this was real. Over the next 2 days, my phone rang constantly with random fast food places calling about Jesse's job applications. 3 different managers asked about his work ethic and reliability since he'd listed me as a reference without asking. I told each one that I couldn't provide a reference as we were currently estranged for personal reasons. One manager laughed and said that explained why Jesse seemed so desperate during the interview. Friday night, I was watching TV when I heard banging on the building's main door, and Jesse's voice yelling my name again. He kept shouting that he knew I was home and just needed somewhere safe to sleep for one night. Xander texted me immediately with photos of Jesse at the door and a warning about lease violations. He said one more incident would trigger the violation clause and I'd have 30 days to vacate. I watched from my window as Jesse banged on the door for another hour before finally giving up. He walked around the side of the building and I lost sight of him in the dark. Saturday morning, I went to water my plants and remembered my spare key under the fake rock by the side entrance. The rock was flipped over and the key was gone, making my hands shake as I realized Jesse must have taken it. I called a locksmith immediately and paid extra for emergency same-day service to change all my locks. The locksmith finished around noon, and I spent the rest of the weekend checking my windows and double-checking every door. Monday morning, I went to work trying to focus on spreadsheets when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security app I'd installed months ago. The camera showed my apartment door opening even though I'd just changed the locks yesterday. My hands shook as I watched Jesse walk into my living room on the tiny screen. He moved through my apartment touching things, opening drawers and sitting on my couch like he belonged there. I called building security, but they said they couldn't enter without me present. Jesse stayed for 20 minutes, used my bathroom, went through my mail, and left a note on my kitchen counter before walking out. I told my boss I had an emergency and drove home finding everything slightly moved, my bills opened, and his note saying, just needed somewhere safe to shower. The violation of my space made me feel sick. I went straight to the police station where the officer took my report and said this happens all the time with family stalking cases. He suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights while they processed the paperwork. Giles met me there with a stack of forms for an emergency restraining order. He explained the legal process while I filled out page after page describing Jesse's pattern of showing up uninvited. The officer nodded as he read my statement and said the escalation from showing up outside to entering my home was textbook. That night, my phone lit up with message after message from Jesse. The text started with him saying he was sorry but quickly turned dark. He wrote about how he'd hurt himself if I didn't help him, and how it would be my fault when they found his body. Each message got more graphic about what he planned to do. I screenshot everything and called 911 requesting a wellness check at our parents' house where I figured he might be. The operator took the information seriously when I read Jesse's messages about self-harm. Within an hour, Mom called screaming that police were at their door looking for Jesse. Dad grabbed the phone yelling that I was trying to get my own brother arrested. They hung up when I tried to explain about the suicide threats. Jesse wasn't even there, but now our parents hated me for sending cops to their house. Kyle texted me 3 days later saying Jesse had been sleeping on his couch, but he had to kick him out. $40 went missing from Kyle's wallet along with his PlayStation controller. Kyle said Jesse denied taking anything but the money, and controller disappeared the same night Jesse left. I saved Kyle's message without responding. After a week of Jesse's constant texts and calls, I finally sent him one message with clear conditions. Get mental health treatment, maintain zero contact for 1 month, then we could discuss boundaries. His response came immediately with 20 messages calling me controlling and crazy. He said I was the one who needed therapy, and that I'd destroyed his life on purpose. I took screenshots of everything for my growing file of evidence. The following Tuesday, I was eating lunch at my desk when the receptionist called saying someone was causing a scene in the lobby. I went downstairs to find Jesse yelling about family abandoning family while 2 security guards tried to calm him down. My coworkers watched from the elevator bank as Jesse pointed at me screaming that I was evil. Security had to physically escort him out while he kept shouting about blood being thicker than water. My manager pulled me into her office afterward asking if this personal situation would affect my work. She said she understood family problems but couldn't have disruptions in the workplace. I promised it wouldn't happen again, even though I had no control over Jesse's actions. Monday morning, I sat in court as the judge reviewed my restraining order petition. She read through the documentation, looked at the apartment entry video, and reviewed Jesse's threatening messages. She said his pattern of escalation was concerning, and granted the emergency order immediately. A process server would deliver the papers to Jesse within 72 hours. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was taking this seriously. The relief lasted exactly 3 days until I heard Jesse was dodging the process server. My cousin said he was bragging in the family group chat about outsmarting the system. He kept changing locations and refusing to answer doors when anyone knocked. He didn't understand that evading service just made his legal situation worse. I documented every sighting report my cousins mentioned, adding them to my file. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from someone named Caitlin Lee, who said she was a community mediator. She explained that Jesse could get a shelter bed and counseling through a voluntary program if he agreed to stop contacting me. Early intervention could prevent criminal charges, she said. I told her I'd consider it if Jesse actually participated, but I doubted he would. She said she'd reach out to him through our parents since that seemed like the only reliable contact. I waited to see if Jesse would take this lifeline or keep spiraling toward worse consequences. Jesse actually showed up for the intake meeting that Caitlin had arranged at the community center 3 days later. I watched from my car across the street as he walked into the brick building wearing the same stained hoodie he'd had on for weeks. 20 minutes later, he came storming out and slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. Caitlin called me an hour later explaining that Jesse had started yelling when they told him about the mandatory therapy requirement. He'd accused everyone in the room of being on my side and said the whole system was rigged against him. She mentioned she'd seen this exact pattern dozens of times with family stalking cases. 2 nights after that meeting, I was getting ready for bed when I heard something sliding under my apartment door. My hand started shaking as I picked up the folded piece of notebook paper. Jesse's messy handwriting called me a traitor to family and said blood should mean something. I immediately called Xander, who came up with his master keys, and checked the hallway security footage on his phone. The video showed Jesse in my building at 2 in the morning wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Xander saved the footage to a flash drive while I called the police to report the restraining order violation. The officers took my statement and the flash drive and said they'd pick Jesse up immediately. They found him crashed on Kyle's couch 4 hours later, according to the police report I got a copy of. The officers explained to Jesse that violating the restraining order meant he'd be arrested if there was another incident. Kyle stood in his doorway listening to the whole thing and started packing Jesse's stuff into a garbage bag before the cops even left. He threw the bag into the hallway and told Jesse he was done with all the drama. Jesse had to sleep in the stairwell of Kyle's building that night because he had nowhere else to go. Within a week, I got notice that Jesse had a court date for misdemeanor violation of the restraining order. The prosecutor called me to go over my testimony and said Jesse's pattern of escalation plus Xander's security footage made this a solid case. She explained I'd have to testify about how his actions were affecting my daily life and mental health. I spent 3 nights writing out everything that had happened and practicing what I'd say in court. The morning of the hearing, I threw up twice from nerves before leaving my apartment. Jesse sat at the defendant's table in a borrowed suit that was 2 sizes too big for him. He glared at me the entire time I testified about not being able to sleep and checking my locks constantly. The judge listened to everything and reviewed all the evidence, including the security footage and the note Jesse had slipped under my door. She ordered Jesse to undergo therapy with a court-approved counselor and actively seek employment within 30 days. He also had to maintain 0 contact with me and check in with the court weekly. Jesse's face turned red as the judge read out all the conditions of his release. 2 weeks later, Jesse started his mandatory therapy sessions with someone named Rosanna Santiago, who specialized in family crisis intervention. My cousin texted me that Jesse was telling everyone in the family group chat that therapy was stupid and pointless. He apparently spent most of his sessions complaining about how I was controlling his entire life and ruining everything. My cousin said Rosanna kept redirecting him back to taking personal accountability for his choices, but Jesse wasn't having it. Meanwhile, Caitlin scheduled separate sessions with me to prepare for potential future mediation if Jesse ever got his act together. She pulled out a legal pad and helped me write down exactly what kind of contact I might be willing to have someday. We spent 2 hours listing specific boundaries like no surprise visits and all communication going through a third party first. She explained that having everything written down would prevent Jesse from twisting my words or claiming I said something different. The 3-page document we created felt like armor protecting me from future manipulation. My parents tried to ambush me with a family dinner the following Sunday to force Jesse and me to reconcile. Mom called crying about how she just wanted her children to get along and couldn't I just forgive him already? I told her I wouldn't attend any family event without a professional mediator present to keep things civil. She screamed that I was destroying the family with all my rules and conditions and hung up on me. Dad called back an hour later and just sounded exhausted when he asked if there was any way to fix this. 3 weeks into Jesse's court-ordered therapy, my parents invited me over for what they said was just coffee with them alone. I should have known better, but I missed them and thought maybe we could talk without Jesse involved. I walked into their living room to find Jesse sitting on the couch eating chips like nothing had happened. He claimed he had no idea I would be there, and Mom immediately backed him up, saying it was a coincidence. I grabbed my purse to leave, but Jesse blocked the doorway, saying we needed to talk like adults. Mom started crying again about family sticking together while I tried to push past Jesse to get out. Dad finally stood up from his recliner and told Jesse to move away from the door right now. Jesse threw the bowl of chips against the wall and stormed out, calling us all crazy. I left immediately and didn't speak to my parents for 2 weeks after that setup. Caitlin and I spent our next session drafting an even more detailed boundary contract that covered every possible scenario. We included specific schedules for any future contact and explicit rules about no unannounced visits ever. She kept emphasizing that having everything in writing would prevent misunderstandings and protect both Jesse and me from future problems. The document grew to 3 pages of bullet points covering everything from phone calls to accidental meetings at family events. Rosanna started making Jesse write down every single thing he'd done wrong during his sessions, and my cousin texted me that Jesse was fighting her about it at first. She told him the program required a full list of harms and a payment plan for damages or he'd be kicked out. Jesse spent 3 sessions arguing before finally starting his list, which Rosanna made him read out loud to his therapy group. My cousin heard from someone in the group that Jesse actually broke down crying when he got to the part about breaking into my apartment. 2 weeks later, Jesse got hired at a warehouse loading trucks, and the first thing he did was text me a photo of his paycheck stub with a bunch of celebration emojis. I stared at my phone for 10 minutes, feeling proud that he was working, but angry that he couldn't follow the simplest rule about no contact. I screenshot the text and forwarded it to Giles, who filed another violation report with the court that afternoon. The judge warned Jesse that one more violation meant jail time, and Jesse actually looked scared for once. Caitlin called me the next day saying she wanted to set up a meeting between Jesse and me with strict rules about staying within the restraining order terms. She explained Jesse had to show 2 months of good behavior first, and the meeting would happen at her office with security present. We scheduled it for the 3rd week of next month, and she gave me homework to prepare what I wanted to say. My landlord sent me a bill for $800 for the lock changes and security review after Jesse's break-ins, plus another $200 for administrative fees. I was looking at the invoice when my cousin who sold Jesse the supplements called, offering to pay $300 of what Jesse owed him to avoid going to small claims court. He said losing $300 was better than paying court fees and never seeing any money anyway. 2 weeks passed with Jesse actually following the rules before the mediation date arrived. I walked into Caitlin's office to find Jesse already sitting there with his hands folded like a kid in the principal's office. He started with an apology that sounded like Rosanna had coached him on every word, admitting he went too far and agreeing to the boundary contract we'd written. His voice actually cracked when he said he understood why I needed protection from him. Caitlin pulled out the payment agreement for $50 a month toward the damages, and Jesse signed without arguing. I told him trust would take years to rebuild if it ever happened at all. The next week, we all went back to court where the judge converted the restraining order into a stipulated agreement that matched everything from our mediation. The judge actually smiled when she said we'd done good work finding a solution without more criminal charges. Jesse shook Giles's hand afterward and thanked him for helping set up the agreement instead of pushing for jail time. I arranged through Xander to return Jesse's belongings he'd left in my building's lobby during his stalking phase. Xander charged me $75 in administrative fees for dealing with the security incidents, but said he'd waive the rest if Jesse stayed away. Jesse sent his first $50 payment through the court system exactly on time, which shocked everyone, including Rosanna. 3 days later, Kyle got arrested for selling stolen car parts and immediately cut contact with Jesse to keep his name out of the investigation. Jesse had to find new emergency contacts for all his programs, since Kyle had been listed on everything. He ended up putting our cousin down instead of trying to contact me, which showed he was actually learning. The cousin felt so guilty about the supplement scam after seeing Jesse hit rock bottom that he actually paid me back $200 of what Jesse had lost. He stopped posting about new business opportunities in the family group chat, and Mom said it was a miracle that something good came from Jesse's disaster. I didn't say anything but used the money toward my moving expenses. I found a smaller apartment 20 miles farther from my family with a doorman and security cameras in every hallway. The lease application asked about recent security issues, and I had to explain the whole Jesse situation, which almost got me rejected, until I showed them the court agreement keeping him away. I started packing my things and didn't tell anyone except Caitlin my new address. 6 weeks later, Mom called saying Jesse wanted to meet at a coffee shop near their house, and he'd been going to therapy every week without missing. I agreed, but only if both parents came too, and we kept it under an hour. Jesse showed up 10 minutes early with a folder of pay stubs from the warehouse and attendance sheets from therapy that Rosanna had signed. His scalp had mostly healed, though you could still see some scarring where the worst burns had been. He pushed the papers across the table without saying anything at first, and I flipped through them, seeing he'd worked 40 hours every week for the past month and a half. Mom kept trying to get us to hug, but I stayed in my seat looking at the documents while Dad just stirred his coffee. Jesse finally said he knew trust would take time, and he wasn't asking for anything except acknowledgement that he was trying. I told him the consistency was good, and left it at that, while Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The meeting lasted exactly 58 minutes before I stood up to leave, and Jesse didn't try to follow me to the parking lot. 2 weeks after that, Jesse called Caitlin asking if he could stay with me for a week, because the guy he was renting a room from had family coming to town. Caitlin forwarded the request, and I emailed back a copy of our written agreement with the section about no overnight visits highlighted in yellow. Jesse responded through Caitlin that he understood and would figure something else out. It was the first time in his entire life he'd accepted a boundary without arguing or trying to guilt me into changing my mind. Caitlin said this showed real progress in their next mediation check-in. Around that same time, Rosanna called asking for some basic information about our family patterns for Jesse's treatment plan. She wanted specific examples of enabling behaviors and manipulation tactics without my personal opinions attached. I gave her 3 examples, including the time Jesse faked being sick to get out of a job interview and how Mom always made excuses for him. Rosanna said Jesse was starting to recognize these patterns in group therapy and actually admitted he'd been manipulating people since high school. She thanked me for keeping the examples factual and brief. The following Monday, Caitlin called to tell me Jesse had missed his therapy appointment, but instead of spiraling or contacting me, he'd called the program's crisis line. The counselor on the line had talked him through whatever was bothering him, and he'd rescheduled for the next day. Caitlin said this was huge because it showed he was using appropriate resources instead of dumping everything on family. I actually slept through the whole night for the first time in months, knowing Jesse had other support systems. 3 weeks later, Jesse qualified for a sober living house, but they required a co-signer for the lease agreement. Instead of pressuring me or our parents, he worked with the program coordinator to find other options. They connected him with a nonprofit that specialized in housing assistance for people in recovery programs. He spent 2 days filling out applications and gathering references from his boss and therapist. The nonprofit approved him for their transitional housing program without needing any family involvement. He moved in the next weekend and sent Caitlin a photo of his new room with a single bed and small dresser. Meanwhile, I finished packing up my apartment and hired movers for the heavy stuff. The new place was 20 miles farther from my family with a doorman who checked IDs and security cameras in every hallway. I updated all my information with work and gave the new address only to Caitlin for official correspondence. The apartment was smaller, but the building felt safer and quieter than anywhere I'd lived before. Jesse's restitution payment came through Caitlin right on schedule, and she forwarded it to my new bank account I'd opened just for these payments. After 90 days without any violations, we had another mediated meeting to revisit the agreement. Jesse had followed every rule, including the no-contact order and regular therapy attendance. We agreed to modify some restrictions so he could send 1 email per week about practical matters only. The first email came 3 days later with just 2 sentences saying thanks for the meeting and he was still working on himself. He didn't ask any questions or try to extend the conversation, and I didn't respond. 3 months passed and I was completely settled in the new apartment with all my privacy settings updated. Jesse was working full-time at the warehouse and Rosanna confirmed he was attending therapy twice a week plus a weekly group session. Our only contact was through Caitlin, who forwarded his restitution payments and occasional updates about his progress. The system was working exactly how it was supposed to, with clear boundaries and no direct communication. Then Caitlin called with news that Jesse had been promoted to shift supervisor at the warehouse. He'd included a bigger restitution payment, almost double the required amount, and a note about saving money for his own apartment. The note mentioned he was looking at places near his work, not near me or our parents, which showed he was respecting the geographic boundaries we'd established. I felt genuine pride reading about his promotion, without the old urge to call and congratulate him directly. Finally, my parents started accepting that our new arrangement was actually healthier than how things used to be. Mom stopped trying to arrange surprise meetings and stopped forwarding Jesse's emails to me. Dad admitted over the phone that Jesse had needed real consequences, and maybe the legal intervention had saved him from something worse. Family dinners were just the 3 of us now, and they were calmer without the constant drama and crisis management. Mom even said she was sleeping better not worrying about what disaster Jesse would create next. 6 months passed and Caitlin called me with an update that Jesse had kept the same address for half a year straight. She forwarded Rosanna's progress report showing he'd attended every therapy session and was finally starting to take responsibility for his choices instead of blaming everyone else. The report mentioned he'd started joking about the toilet tattoo in group therapy, telling new members it was his reminder not to make decisions when desperate. I started seeing this guy from my yoga class who asked about my family during our 3rd date, and I just said I had a brother who lived across town. No drama to explain, no crisis calls to interrupt dinner, no need to warn him about Jesse showing up randomly. My boyfriend met Jesse exactly once at a coffee shop for 15 minutes, and only knew him as my quiet brother who worked at a warehouse. Almost a year to the day after everything exploded, Caitlin forwarded me a 3-page letter from Jesse. He'd written about understanding how his entitlement had destroyed everything, how therapy helped him see his manipulation patterns, and thanking me for forcing boundaries even when it meant watching him fall apart. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in my desk drawer without responding. Rosanna called Caitlin 2 months later to report that Jesse was mentoring another program participant through the housing application process. He'd spent 3 hours helping the guy fill out forms, sharing which agencies actually had openings, warning him about scams he'd fallen for himself. Caitlin said this showed real empathy development since Jesse was using his disasters to help someone else avoid them. We agreed to meet for coffee at a Starbucks halfway between our apartments. No mediator, just us for the first time in over a year. Jesse showed up 5 minutes early with normal hair grown back, wearing clean clothes that actually fit, talking about saving money for laser removal on the tattoo. We stuck to safe topics like the weather and his job, neither of us mentioning the past, and after exactly 1 hour, I stood up, and he didn't try to make me stay longer. 3 weeks later, Jesse sent his final restitution payment through proper channels with a receipt showing he'd paid an extra $100 beyond what he owed. The note said he'd been at the warehouse for 8 months, got his own studio apartment near work, and was putting money in savings for the first time in his life. 2 years from that first phone call where he'd demanded I stop giving advice, we had a routine of monthly coffee meetings at the same Starbucks. Jesse never asked to extend them past an hour, never pushed for more contact, never showed up at my apartment or called outside our scheduled check-ins. He mentioned starting community college for warehouse management certification, and I told him that sounded like a good plan without offering any suggestions about which classes to take. We both laughed at how careful I was not to give advice and how careful he was not to ask for it. Sitting there watching him pay for his own coffee with money from his steady job, living in his own place he'd kept for months, attending school he'd enrolled in himself, I understood we'd built something completely different from before. Not the close siblings who talked every day, not the crisis manager sister and disaster-prone brother, but two adults who respected each other's boundaries and could have a normal conversation without drama. Jesse thanked me for letting him fail hard enough to finally learn, said the restraining order and legal consequences were the only things that broke through his entitlement. I realized that sometimes the best way to help someone is to stop helping them completely and let them figure it out themselves. I'm glad you were here for this one. Stories feel a lot warmer when they're shared, and I hope this one added a little light to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to keep that going.